Hi, everyone. Welcome to Work Ready, Public Speaking Tips for Career Success. My name is Ana Silvia Torres, and I will be moderating today's event. And I'm also a librarian with LA County Library. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Work Ready program. The Work Ready program started at the end of last year of December 2020. And it was sort of a response to COVID-19, the pandemic, and the job situation that a lot of people faced during that time. And so the library enacted the Work Ready program, and we've been going on for almost a year now. And the program has three separate components. One is that we lend out laptops and hotspots so that participants can check them out and use them to apply for jobs, write their cover letters and their resumes, or attend events such as this one, which is the second component of the program. We have live events on different topics, such as public speaking tips for career success. We also have pre-recorded programs, which you can find on our YouTube page. Also, if you need to jump off a little bit early or you missed any portion of this event, don't worry, it's going to be on our YouTube channel. Secondly, we are lending out, I'm so sorry about that. We are lending out, we are checking out the books and audiobooks, all related to career success. And you can find those on our catalog, on our Overdrive, as well as our physical items. And I will post links to everything that I mentioned in the chat. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our presenters. Today we have Liz Mohler and Oleg Kagan. Welcome, Oleg and Liz.
Thank you very much, Ana Silvia. I've been looking forward to this presentation, and I know it's going to be important for people, and we're going to provide some very useful tips, right, Liz?
Absolutely. We're excited to continue the conversation on public speaking tips for career success.
So, as Ana Silvia mentioned, my name is Oleg Kagan. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for LA County Library, and with me is Liz Mohler, who's a career coach extraordinaire. Before we jump in, Liz, in your professional opinion, working with clients, how important would you say is public speaking?
I would say that we've picked a topic that is hugely important because public speaking is really any kind of speaking, any kind of communicating. And so it starts with a phone call, it starts with a conversation. So public speaking is a huge part of the executive coaching that I do.
And as you can see in this slide, in almost every aspect of work and in fact in personal life, public speaking can lead to success. It can lead to success in presenting ideas, whether it's just providing status update in a small meeting or speaking to your boss or presenting new and innovative ideas to change the direction of a company. If you have capacity with public speaking, then you can do that in a way that's going to be persuasive enough to get your ideas noticed and implemented. It's useful for sharing successes at meetings. That can be meetings within a company, that can be at a professional conference, which of course, if you do well, can lead to networking opportunities that can help your career in the long term. Public speaking can help you serve the community through organizations like the Lions Club, Kiwanis, and others, where oftentimes the members are called to do public speaking in order to serve the community. And of course, advocating for yourself, whether you want a promotion or a raise, you're going to have to come up with a rationale and present that rationale to your boss or the company in general in order to convince them why you deserve to be promoted or given a raise. And finally, for maybe the most important one for the folks out there today, getting a job. Because what is a job interview other than public speaking?
Right. And it's not just get the job, it's get the job done. So hopefully
Mhm.
some of the people that are on the call, maybe they already have a job, but they need to speak up at that job. Maybe they've been on it for a few weeks or a few months or a few years, and they're at a point where maybe people are looking to them to speak up on behalf of coworkers and colleagues. So today we're going to cover a lot of these things, and it all does sort of circle back to what is public speaking and why bother. And I think that definition of public speaking is that's anytime we have an opportunity, even just like this. This is public speaking. I heard that there's over 150 people signed up or zoomed in on this. So even though I feel like I'm at my home talking to just Oleg, it's public speaking because there's 150 people out there. So I'm excited.
And we'll be covering a little bit about doing public speaking in a virtual environment later on. But before we do, let's hear a little bit about us, the presenters. Liz, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. So I am originally from Madison, Wisconsin. So I put Bucky Badger up there, and I now live in Los Angeles. I have two sons. One is a UCLA design media artist, and I like to brag that he's currently at Art Basel, Miami, producing some NFT artwork, and a younger son who's a Boston University lacrosse player. And my husband and I are both coaches. I'm a ACC certified coach through the International Coach Federation. He does sales consulting and coaching. And during COVID, I've been working from my home office here in Los Angeles. So coaching, training, consulting is something I've been doing for over 30 years. And I love coaching for the libraries. I love sending my message out to the world to say that you can research and use resources from the library and get out there and find the job of your dreams. And I love this series, Work Ready. And so that's a little bit about who I am. My academics, where I'm from, and my passion is to help everybody sort of get their answers answered during this program.
Absolutely. And Liz is a frequent library presenter, both in the physical library spaces and over the last year in our virtual spaces, and we're very glad to have her. And my name is Oleg Kagan. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for LA County Library, also a Bruin. Uh, and I've been working for LA County Library for upwards of 11 years. I've worked in a variety of positions, from being the volunteer coordinator and adult services librarian to being a community library manager, and now I'm in a coordinator position. And I've worked all over the county, all the way up in Lancaster, down to Lomita, to West Hollywood, and now our office is in Downey. I'm also an author, in the book that I edited and wrote some of is in the slide here. And I'm a former member of Toastmasters International, which we'll be talking about later. Very important element of practicing public speaking deliberately. I was once the president of Los Angeles 3 Toastmasters, which at that time, which was about 10 years ago, was the longest continuously running club in the Toastmasters organization. That's who we are, and here's what we'll be covering. We're going to hit the high points, the most important things about public speaking. Since we only have about an hour and 15 minutes to talk, we really had to squash together the most useful knowledge. So we'll be covering preparation, we'll be covering presentation, we'll do a deep dive into job interviews, because of course this is work ready, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So if you do have questions, please feel free to put them into the chat at any time during the presentation. There will definitely be time for us to cover those questions. So let's dive right into preparation. Liz and I are going to double team these logistical questions, because these questions are the ones that really set the stage for any kind of preparation you do for any sort of public speaking, be that speaking at a conference, speaking to a few people at a meeting, or in a job interview. And the first question that you want to consider is, how familiar are you with the material? And the reason that you want to consider that maybe first, I mean, these questions are not in specific order, but I would say that that's one of the questions that you definitely want to consider first, because your familiarity with material sets the tone. It really helps you plan out the preparation that you need. So how much time do you need to prepare if you're not familiar with the material? If there's a lot of information that you need, if you're not sure how the information is organized, you're going to spend a lot of time preparing for that. And if you are very comfortable with the material, if it just rolls off your tongue, just sits at the top of your head, you're going to spend most of your time preparing the physicality of your presentation. You're going to spend more time with the organization, and maybe your overall preparation time will take less time.
And my comment on that is, are you familiar with the material as a job seeker? If you're going for an interview, the material is you. So how comfortable are you in that phase one of career exploration of who am I? What do I know how to do? What do I like to do? What do I trust that I can do? You're the subject matter expert on yourself. So reminding yourself of what you do, rereading the resume, because you are the material. And so you have to ask yourself, and we'll go on to the next one, what information do you need to convey? What is it that they want to know? Above and beyond maybe what's on your resume, what do they want to know about you? Because they're digging in an interview situation to who you are. But before we get into that, carry on with the audience.
The audience. Is there a public speaking without an audience? There is not. So you can break down this question of who is the audience in several ways. The first is simple. It's just demographics. Is the audience older, younger? Um, and also, how familiar are they with the subject of your presentation? If you're presenting as a professional to other experts, your presentation is going to be a lot more detailed and technical. If you're presenting to a lay audience who may have never thought about your topic, you're going to give a sky-high view and simplify, not use any jargon, maybe be a little bit more informal. And if you're presenting to the CEO or top level members of an organization, you're going to try to maybe avoid the jargon, but what you're going to really focus on is an executive summary and really the bottom line. And for all of those, you're going to prepare for questions. And you're going to get different questions from experts, from lay audience, or from board members. And so in considering your audience, you're going to be working out all of the other things here. So all of these things are really integrated, but these are important questions to ask.
Yeah. And I know we're going to dig into location on a slide coming up, but asking yourself at the beginning, where am I going? How much time do I have? What should I bring with me? What sort of visual aids do I need to bring? I absolutely encourage people to bring a resume or a portfolio of your work, or put together a PowerPoint slide, even if it's just your own rehearsal. You may not use it or show it. You may have a deck that you've prepared for a conference or a convention. You got to kind of get some logistics figured out. What's the format? What's the style of the presentation?
Absolutely. How long does it need to be? That's really a crucial, and something that you learn in Toastmasters. It's one of the most. Nobody is upset if the presentation goes a little short, but a
Yeah,
lot of people get upset if a presentation goes 15 minutes over because probably they're waiting for lunch or dinner.
absolutely.
And
Same in an interview. You kind of want to know, is this a 30-minute interview? Is this a 45-minute interview, or 15? You want to get to the point quickly if
exactly.
it's a screening interview, 15 minutes.
And one other thing that I want to bring up with this item, location, duration, visual aids, is when it comes to visual aids, you have options. Some people feel like they always have to have a PowerPoint presentation, and it does seem like a deck is default. But as we've done with Work Ready, we haven't always had slides for the presentations. And what I found is that people in our post-event surveys have responded saying that at first they were a little bit taken aback that it was just a person talking. But then after a while, they were able to relax, go, okay, I don't have to pay attention or read the slides while people talk. So what I want to say about that is that sometimes it's okay not to have a PowerPoint presentation. Sometimes it's okay just to rely on, as people did in the age of yore with storytelling, just rely on you, the human voice, the visual of the person. And then this last piece is especially, I really wanted to include this because it's it's what you get from practicing deliberately in your public speaking skills. And I specifically italicized you in how is it best for you to prepare, because there isn't one way. Uh, I want to say that when I started with Toastmasters, I read a lot of books about public speaking, and there are a ton of them out there, and they all offer advice. And some of them offer advice in a way that says, you have to do this or you will fail. And I just want to say that's not true. No book knows everything about public speaking, and no book knows you. One of the books that I remember reading said that you have to write down every word of your presentation. You have to have this script, and then you have to memorize that script. And so I started with Toastmasters doing that. I started practicing deliberately, writing down every word and attempting to memorize it. And I failed pretty spectacularly doing that because that's not my way of preparing. I can't do that. Um, if I do, I start to not be able to pay attention to the words I'm saying, but pay attention to try to remember them in my mind and not be able to have any vocal variety or, any other kind of expression. And so I've listed here a bunch of different preparation methods. It's not an exhaustive list, it's just a few. And by practicing, you decide how it's best for you to prepare based on all these questions and your personal style.
And I think that that's a really good point to make, is that there's no two people alike, there's no two jobs alike. And so hopefully the audience has a notebook and they're going to take notes, because some of the things that we say are going to be spot on and resonate with them. And some of the comments that we give, they're going to say, that doesn't apply to me. But I would bet somebody else is actually taking notes on those comments because they're at this executive level and somebody else might be at an entry level. Or
Mhm.
somebody might be thinking about a presentation that they have to a group, and somebody else might be thinking about a presentation that's one-on-one. So we tried to give you an overview in this program, and we tried to brainstorm, what are some preparation methods that you can then learn about and then pick and choose what fits right for you. And the last thing I'll say is a bit of a Lizism. I tend to give my clients little short synopsises, and I was once given that similar advice. And the Lizism is this: improvisation is fine as long as you write it down first. And that was given to me
Preparation is key.
by someone who said, oh, you have to write it all down. You can't improvise. You have to write it all down first. Whereas I tend to be quite improvisational because my comfort level is the material that I know. However, if it's new material, I'm going to research it, I'm going to write it down, rehearse it, and then improvisation is fine because I've written it down first. So,
And like a lot of your preparation methods can vary depending on the material. They don't just because you're comfortable doing information you're familiar with in one way. Um, if you find that there's another talk that you're not feeling very confident with, you could write the whole thing out. There's no Your preparation is your business. So you can, for example, create an outline of your presentation so which fills out some of the information. You can create just a list of main things you want to talk about. You can do mind mapping, which is takes preparation in a whole different level where you're not even writing out a speech, you're just creating bubbles of information and lines between them to create a kind of a tree of connections. So for people who are more comfortable visually thinking and visually remembering, a mind map is really an ideal way to structure a presentation and then be able to deliver it in a way that makes narrative sense, but also makes visual sense to you. PowerPointing is one that I don't know if ever anybody's used the term PowerPointing when it comes to a presentation method. When I think of PowerPointing, I think you're coming up with a presentation as you're making the deck. So you're creating the slides and you're thinking about, okay, what am I going to say during this slide? So you're structuring it out at the same time as you're coming up with the words. I use talking it out, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So these are some presentation methods. I'm including writing it all out, a popular one. But let's move forward to.
well, and
Oh,
as
go
we
ahead.
close up the preparation methods, I think that it's sometimes it's a combination of all of the above. That you start with, okay, I know I'm going to present to this group, or I know I'm going to have this interview coming up. Let me just in my mind map out what it is I want to say. So you sketch it out, and then you want to clean it up and maybe make it bullet points. And then you may want to script out an opening and a close. And that's kind of a combination of that preparation. So you've got lots of different tools you can draw from to help you get prepared.
Right, if you're not comfortable with part, you can always just create a chunk for it and then try to memorize that chunk.
Right.
So why rehearse? I mean, why why do we need to do that? I have four bullet points in this slide, and I want to talk about these bullet points by telling you how I prepare for talks. And this is a method that has come up for me as I was going through Toastmasters. And basically, when I joined Toastmasters, my goal was to become an excellent public speaker. And the way I was going to do that was I dove in head first. And we'll talk more about the structure of Toastmasters, and we're gonna keep talking. You don't have to join Toastmasters, but the important thing is deliberate practice, and I got that by speaking at literally every meeting. I said, put me on the schedule. I don't know always what I want to talk about, but put me on the schedule because I needed to practice all the time and reflect on it. And so I determined after a few talks that the best method for me was actually talking it out, and I that's actually one of the That's one of the items here, talking it out. And what that means is that if I'm familiar with the topic, I write nothing down. I start by thinking about kind of a general structure in my head, and then I'm sitting in my car or sitting in a room, and I just start talking. I just improvise the entire presentation. And then after I finish that one time, I'll continue to improvise. So I'll say this, when I did that, this worked, and then this didn't work. So I immediately start honing the message. So the reason I talk it out is because for me, there's a major difference between what's written on a piece of paper, what I can read in my head, which I read very fast in my head. I can just skim through something, and the way that I actually have to present it. And so by talking it out, I close that gap. And as I talk it out more and more, and I will talk out presentations sometimes 30, 40, 50 times between when I start preparing and the final product. So each of those times, I hone the message. So I'm always cutting and changing and going, wait, this doesn't work. As I repeat the words, as I literally say them, I gain confidence that during the presentation, I'll be able to do it exactly this way. And I know that because I've been saying it, I can also adjust it in the moment if I need to. And of course, the final point here is managing time. It's, you get a certain amount of time that for a presentation, for a job interview, and you have to stick within your time. As a professional person, as a, even at, if you're presenting at a wedding, if you're doing a speech to the couple, you only have a certain, you don't have, 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours to speak. You have to speak during your part. And if you have 15 minutes and you speak for 2 minutes, well, I feel like you're leaving some stuff unsaid. So part of preparation is managing your time. And the way I do that is in talking it out. At the beginning, it's kind of loose. It's not really clear. And then somewhere towards the middle of my preparation, I start to use a stopwatch. And after a few sessions, I'll be able to get a very general outline of how long this is going to take. And because I've spoken a lot in public and I've been talking at the presentation, I know that I tend to slow down when I get in front of people. And so I'll factor that into my time. And by the end of my preparation period, before I actually have to speak, I can come come to a place and speak down to the minute because I've said it so many times. So that's my method of preparation, and
Yeah. Well,
my
and I was going to say,
whatever method you use. Yeah,
I'm a little bit of the opposite
mm,
because when I start to speak, when I'm giving a presentation or a workshop, I tend to speed up. I get excited and I talk really quickly, and I can kind of
yeah, I think
start
that's
to
most people.
realize that I'm a little bit fast. And yet, when I look at this preparation and rehearsal, I always remind my clients to read their resumes, because what's written and what's spoken, when somebody asks you the question, tell me about your previous job or tell me about your previous position, you want to make sure you're congruent with what's on the resume with what you're talking about. And one really good tip that I'll share with all of you to hone your message is to find people that are in your reference list, people that are going to be like, recommendations for you, and ask them if you can do a practice interview with them, because you want to call your references up and let them know, hey, I'm interviewing for this job and I'd like to chat with you a little bit about it. Here's why I think I'm a good fit, or here's why I think they should hire me, or let me tell you how I'm going to answer the question, so tell me about yourself. And if you can have 3 or 4 friends to repeat that conversation with, each time you talk to those friends, you're going to tell them about the job, the position you're applying for, and then you're going to tell them why you have the confidence that you're a good fit for it. And then you can actually, put a stopwatch on it and see how long does it take for you to answer that question. So tell me about yourself. I've been career coaching for over 30 years. I used to tell people, call your home answering machine and leave a message that says, hi, my name is, and the reason I'm talking. And when the beep goes off, your 2 minutes is up. You can go home later and listen to it. Now we can pick up our iPhones and just go ahead and record it and then play it back and see how it sounds. Because those little sound bites can be rehearsed, and you can do a little chart on, how long they took to do them.
Yeah, recording yourself is a really good way to get really honest feedback from yourself. Because when you're speaking just out loud, like when I'm speaking out loud, I can kind of hear myself and think because I've done it many times. But if you're new to it and you want to be able to get yourself, situated with what you're saying, yeah, recording is really good. But I really like what you said, Liz, about asking other people for advice, asking for other people for feedback. Because when somebody writes a book, I mean, they show it to people. They have an editor look at it before they present it to the general public. In many other aspects of life, people ask for feedback and really need feedback. And but sometimes when people do job interviews, they're shy about asking their references. They're shy about asking the people closest to them because I don't know, they don't want to feel like they're bragging or whatever it is. It could be so many different reasons. But those are the people that will be able to give you the most honest feedback.
Yeah. And I think I'm skipping ahead because I see a question in the
Mhm,
posts that talks a little bit about imposter syndrome
mhm.
and going into a group at work and how do you get more articulate. You might try that with just one or two coworkers and run it past them. I've been thinking about something. I think I'm going to share it with the group. What do you think about this? And find one or two nice, friendly, supportive people and ask them for some feedback. Or even tell them, you know what, I don't need your feedback. I just need to hear myself say this to somebody else. Sometimes I say to my husband and my kids, I don't need your feedback. I don't need a response. I just need you to listen. And I just need to feel it in my bones of how does it feel to talk to somebody about something. And sometimes that can be a really good first step before going out to a group that you're not comfortable with, is to practice with friends and family or with coworkers or people that you know, like, and trust.
Yeah, imposter syndrome is a really tough thing to deal with because it's something that's happening inside that you really can't tell the people that when you're in an interview, you can say, "Oh, I'm feeling really nervous," and that's fine. But you can't say, "I'm feeling like I shouldn't even be here." Like, you can't say that.
Yeah.
But so many people feel that way.
Yeah. And remember
So
that they
yeah.
want you to succeed. If it's an interview,
Mhm.
they've brought
Yes.
you in, they screened you, they chose you, they want you to do as well as possible. So they
Hmm.
want you to be, even at work, they want you to be successful at work. So they're on your side.
Absolutely. So let's continue with preparation. We'll cover some of these other things that people are bringing up and imposter syndrome and everything a little bit later in the presentation. I'm glad that we were able to touch on it now, and so there'll be a continuity as we move on. So you've prepared. You've asked yourself logistical questions. You've rehearsed over and over and over again, and you're ready. And then you get to the location, and the butterflies in your stomach start to jitter around, and you're not sure what to do with yourself. So you've arrived. Okay. One thing you can do is if you arrive way early, is to sit in your car and say the presentation just one more time. If you're doing a job interview, do the parts that you've rehearsed, look over your resume. Uh, that's fine. If you're doing a full presentation and just do the part that you're least comfortable with, and you could tell yourself, "I'm going to do this one more time, and after this, it's going to be in me. I want to be able to do it." And when it comes to arriving early, what would you say, Liz, is a good time to arrive for a job interview?
Well,
How early?
it's tricky because we're in the time of COVID. And so I'm in Los Angeles where traffic is coming back to normal. So obviously, travel time, getting to the right building, finding the right office, that can be a challenge. Logging onto Zoom, maybe coming in a little early, checking in on whether you've got your technology all working. So I used to say rule of thumb, 5 to 15 minutes early. In some situations, you might want to get there an hour early, have lunch close to where your next call is. If you're doing a presentation in front of a group, give yourself a little more flexibility. So it's kind of a wide range, but the truth of the matter is the Lizism is on time is late, early is on time, and late is unacceptable. So be there early and be prepared.
Correct. You mentioned lunch. I'm always too nervous before I have to do a job interview, do public speaking to eat. I would be like, I'd rather be hungry and eat afterward. And maybe I'll get some water or something,
I
but I don't think I'd be able to eat lunch.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, you can always get to a place, and if you don't come to the office, I mean, you could always just sit in your car, take a walk around the block. I know that I had one situation where I was set to interview somebody, and he showed up like in an hour early, and he came, and it was a library. We were interviewing for a position within the branch, and he knocked on the door, and we weren't even open yet. And one of my staff told me that this person had arrived, and his interviews are starting in an hour. And I thought, well, what are we supposed to do with him? We're not open. We don't have a place for him to be. So we kind of let him in and let him kind of wander around the library, even though we were closed. But yeah, that's an hour is a long time to arrive, and then kind of be there. And
Yeah.
waiting at the location. So I would say if you arrive an hour early, you want to kind of be somewhere else for a while and
And I think
show up 15 minutes before maybe.
I skip ahead to observe your environment because
Mhm.
you need to be very tuned in to what's going on. If the office is closed, don't knock on the door. If they're busy, maybe check in and then go to the bathroom or do something. I've told clients, if you've never been to a place that you're interviewing, go the week before. Go a few days
Mhm.
before. Check out the environment. I had one client who was going in to make a presentation and they were kind of dressed like me. They were in a suit and they were ready to dress to impress and go in, and then they showed up to the location a week early just to sort of check things out and meet with somebody. And they looked around and everybody was in jeans and t-shirts. And they quickly reevaluated what they were going to wear to the presentation because they didn't want to show up in a suit and tie when everybody there was in jeans and t-shirts. So knowing your audience, observing the environment, knowing what the location is, very, very key points.
To piggyback off the location, and if you get there a week early, you can really scope out the parking situation. If so often you go to a place like some kind of office park or where the company's located, and the parking's like $15 on the bottom level, and really, I don't know. Now, I don't always like to pay $15 for parking, but sometimes there'll be street parking, right there, a block away or something. And if you arrive on the day of, you don't have time and you're too nervous to drive around to find a better option. But if you arrive a week early, save yourself a little money and also just know, like, okay, that's one thing I don't have to worry about. I know exactly where I'm going to park when I get there the next week. It's like little things like that you make it easier for yourself.
Yeah. And that's really the reason we're having this conversation today is we want public speaking to be easy. We want you to have the tools in your toolkit to make it easy. And I love the fact that we put breath at this and this because that's part of your preparation is taking a deep breath and relaxing and knowing that you will get through this. It is not going to kill you. We get this catastrophic thinking in our head that this is the worst thing and we work ourselves into a tizzy and then we're not breathing and we're just stressed out. There's a great TED Talk out by Amy Cuddy, came out years ago, and I still tell my clients, watch her video because she talks about the power pose. She talks about
Ah,
breathing. She talks about taking advantage of those few minutes before an interview. Maybe find a private place or the bathroom and allow yourself to say, I got this. Or the Superman pose with your hands on your waist. I can do this. This is me, and take a deep breath and just engage and say, I'm here, I deserve this, and take a few deep breaths before you head into any speaking opportunity.
indeed. I now feel a lot more confident because I'm doing a power pose.
The power
I have to,
pose, absolutely.
the
It's hard
thinking man.
in this little box, it's hard to see us power,
I know.
but you clench the fist and you do the victory pose. There you go, before you even start. Yes.
We're gonna have to send the link to that video
Yeah.
in our follow-up email. We'll definitely make sure to do that. I think it's
Well,
gonna be good for people to watch.
it's a nice segue to your next
Yes.
slide because we're talking about the fact that when you're on stage, your hands, your eyes, your voice, everything matters. You've really got to embrace what stage you have, even if your stage is Zoom. Sometimes it helps to talk about, taking big problems on and making them small problems and sort of you
Hmm.
that choice of how you work with your hands because you
Yes.
avoid the nervous stuff. You've got to avoid the fidgetiness, and you've got to adjust your body movements to the audience that you have.
Mhm. And I'm gonna rewind us back to this slide because I want to ask Anna Sylvia, are there any questions that we should address at this point? I think this is the point we wanted to stop briefly because before we get you on stage, let's see if there are any questions.
No, actually, Liz, you answered the imposter syndrome question, sort of seeing that come up a lot as people sort of feeling like, should I even be here? So no, I think you've answered that question, but just a reminder for anybody else, if you have questions, please let us know in the chat.
I'm looking at the chat here, and I just want to address really quickly. And this is also related to imposter syndrome. We had a question about interviewees not so much paying attention during the interview, and I think that's an important thing to consider. That sometimes when you're at an interview, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but there you might not get the response that you're looking for. Um, And the fact is that that may relate to you and that may relate to the person who's interviewing. And you really don't know why that's happening. And so what I recommend doing if you're in a situation where you're getting weird signals from people, like they're not paying attention, or maybe even if you're feeling inside, like you're not communicating your message exactly right, or you're feeling imposter syndrome, just keep going. You just have to plow through. You've rehearsed, you've practiced, your presentation is at the point where you're comfortable with it. So do it. Bring the energy that you were expecting to bring. If you see somebody making a sour face, don't worry about it. Just go. Just do it. That's, you kind of steel yourself and continue. And if parts of your presentation is to smile, then smile, even at their sour face.
That's
And then,
absolutely
yeah,
true. I've had many speaking engagements where I look out to the audience and I feel like they're falling asleep in their chairs, and I'm responsible for getting them excited and motivated. And yet you start to read the audience and it can bring you down. And we don't want that to happen,
yeah, you don't
especially
want
in
to
an
grab
interview.
that energy from them.
Yeah, you don't want somebody that's giving you a funny look to really kind of pull you over, because they might be just that type of personality and you just don't really know them that well. You've got to stay as positive as you can and allow those negative thoughts to just float right off your back because you're there to put your best foot forward. So great point.
I remember doing a speech one time to it was about 50 people, and in the back I see a person, and he just has this really, he just seems so mad. And I'm thinking, like, I'm looking at him every so often, and it seems like he hates his presentation. He's fuming. And then at some point during the presentation, I realized that's just his face. He just has he just has a normal, like, resting, sour face. And it has nothing to do with me at all. Maybe he loves the presentation, but that's the way he looks. And so
Absolutely. Yep.
there was one other question that I wanted to address here. I think it came to me privately as the host. So just a reminder, if you're going to ask questions, make sure to send them to all panelists. That way we can all see them, including Liz and Anna Sylvia, and we can all address them. So I'm going to read out the question, and both Liz and I can cover it, and then we'll move on to the stage presentation. So the question is, if at an interview you're given a 10-minute window to give a presentation on a topic and you do not finish, would you say that this is a crucial factor in not being selected for the job? That's a great question. Um, my feeling about that is, and Liz, you can add on to this because I'm sure that you also have something to add, is that there's a difference if you get even 10 minutes, if you speak 4 minutes, and if you speak for 9 minutes. So if you speak for 9 minutes, then very likely that's not the reason that you weren't given the job. If you speak for 4 minutes and they were expecting 10, then the interviewer you might be thinking, well, they had all this time and they didn't use this time. They left 6 minutes on the table and finished everything in four. We thought that this presentation would take 10 and this person thought four. So there's not a meeting of the minds there. So in that situation, you kind of want to consider the expectation of the audience. If they're giving you 10 minutes, then you want to be somewhere near that.
Yeah. And the meeting of the minds is really what the communication is about. That's why people have interviews, is to meet and to connect. And the number one reason you'll get hired, which is also the number one reason you might get fired, is it boils down to this simple little 3-letter word, and it's fit. So they're interviewing you to see if you're the right fit. So they ask for a 10-minute and you give them a 10-minute, but you don't cover everything. You might not be the right fit because they really only wanted the 10 minutes, but you can explain to them, you know what, I have more to cover on this. However, let me wrap up. And sometimes when you're doing a public speaking, you've got to kind of roll with it based on what happens. And it can be something from, somebody, interrupting to time running out. And that's where being flexible is key. So I don't know if that's the reason you wouldn't get the job, Unfortunately, most employers won't tell you why you didn't get the job. They'll just say it wasn't a good fit. But you can always follow up and ask them, is there any feedback that you can give me? It's worth asking just to sort of portray. That's also the benefit of having a thank you note to follow up and say, hey, I ran out of time in my 10-minute presentation, but I really enjoyed meeting you, and here's what I would have covered. Give them something as a follow-up.
We had another question come in here. Um, so Michelle says, I have been surprised at a job interview to find it was a panel interview versus a one-on-one interview. How can an interviewee be prepared for surprises like this?
Surprises. Well, life is full of surprises. And I think the more you get out there and start enjoying life and putting yourself in challenging situations where you can prepare to be unprepared and prepare to go with the flow is one of the best things you can do. Nobody's perfect. And if I can inspire you with anything, it's to say that there's no perfect job and there's no perfect person for that job. So we all need to be a little bit light on ourselves. Don't be so stressed out. When you show up and there's a panel interviewing, kind of run with it. Nice to meet you. This is not competition. These are colleagues. Maybe they're going to interview and hire all of you. Maybe they're just trying to do this quickly. So it's not a competition. I used to work for a university and we did group interviews, not because we wanted to get through them more quickly. We wanted to see how everybody in the group would get along with each other. So we weren't just interviewing them one-on-one in a group, we were interviewing them and watching how they interacted with each other. So your role is to just be flexible and go with the flow. And you expected it to be one person and now there's 3 or 4, and maybe there's 3 or 4 of them and only one of you. So you've got to give time to each of the 3 or 4 people on the panel so that they know that they got time with you. So it's a little bit of deciding, I'm not sure which direction that was, whether it's a group interview or a group panel interviewing you, but either way, you want to treat it the same way and just roll with it. Just, do that Cuddy power pose of I got this, and I can talk to 4 of you or I can talk with 4 of you. It's all the same.
Well, because yeah, the fact is that you've prepared and you're ready. No matter what happens, you're bringing something to the table when you go to the interview. And whether it's 4 people or 1, you've got it handled. So we had a question here from David. He says, I'm confident and I prepare really well before meeting, but once it's my turn to speak, I panic and blank out. Any tips on this dilemma? Yeah.
That's a common one. You are not alone. I bet if we had a show of hands, there would be a lot of other people who are fine sitting in their homes doing the rehearsal, and then they get out there and all those people are there and they're like, oh, I forgot what I was going to say. One thing I would say is take notes and show up with your notes with you, and don't hesitate to glance at the notes. Zoom allows us to take a look and check back in and let me be clear, and allow yourself to get grounded. Sometimes I even say honesty is the best policy. If you lose your train of thought, go ahead and say to them, you know what? Give me a minute. I need a second to pull myself together. I just blanked out on this. Let me get back to you, and go for it. The other thing is a sneaky one. If you've got a water bottle or a glass of water, you could take a sip of water and give yourself a moment. They'll wait. They want to hear what you have to say. That's why they invited you there. So don't be so stressed out about blanking out, but know that when you do blank out, you can acknowledge it. You can say to them, I just forgot what I was going to say. Hang on a second. And people want you to succeed. So if you just remind yourself of that, they're not there to make your life miserable. They're there to support you and encourage you and see if you're the right fit. They want to hear what you have to say.
Yes, and one thing I wanted to mention, a pro tip with regards to notes at a presentation is don't bring little piece of paper like this because with a bunch of writing on it, because those are going to be hard to read when you're sitting in front of people and you have to glance down quickly, or even if you take your time, you have to kind of decipher your note. What you want to do is you want to bring a sheet of paper, make the font large, 16, 18, so that you can see it, even if you have to bring multiple sheets. But make sure to number the sheets so you know which page is number 1 and which page is number 2 in case you have to shuffle them. But double space them so that it's easy when you have to glance down to follow where the writing is. And when you arrive early at a presentation, if it's a presentation to a lot of people, like if it's a talk, then you can see at the if there's a little light at the podium, you can see kind of the lighting conditions for what will your notes will look like when you set them up. But even at a job interview, you want to have if you're going to have notes, you want to have them in a way that's easy for you to read, so that if you have to glance down, you're not going to have to find your place. It's going to be very easy to do that.
Yeah. I think another trick is to have somebody that's really supportive who can tell you right before your presentation, you're going to do a great job. I know I have an accountability buddy, and before I go into an intense meeting, I call her up and she just lights me up. She's like, "You're so smart and you're so talented. You got this." And even if I've been doing this for 30 years, every once in a while I know I'm anticipating a challenging situation and I'm going to blank out and I'm going to panic. And I call her and I say, "Can we talk? 10 minutes before my presentation, can we talk?" And she's always there for me and she's always boosting me up. So find an accountability buddy, find somebody that can be your cheerleader, and make sure you've got them in your back pocket so you have that little voice that says you can do this, currently ready to go and support you.
And Peggy brought up an interesting point in the chat, and that is that you can call ahead and ask if it's going to be a panel interview on both sides, if you're going to be interviewing with other people or if the interviewers are going to be multiple people. I don't think anybody is going to hold it against you if you try to find out this kind of basic information. That's a good tip, Peggy. Thank you. So I don't see any other questions right at the moment. Feel free during the second half of the presentation to post your questions. We'll cover them at the end. But now, Liz, what do you think? Let's put people on stage. Everybody's nervous out there now.
Yep.
Um, so on stage. So this is for people who enjoy public speaking. This is the best part. Actually, be preparation and rehearsal is hard. It's kind of you're repeating the same thing over, but when you actually get on stage, it pays off, and you've got that audience there to boost you up. So during this part of the presentation, what I want you to think about, the context that I want to set here, is that for a beginner public speaker to a expert public speaker, it's a lot like driving a car. When you start driving a car, you're a student driver, you get in the car and everything is new information. And you are with a driving instructor or with a friend or a family member, and they give you instructions, but you're instantly overwhelmed. You're looking at the road, you're looking at the wheel, you've got the two pedals if you're using stick, you've got the clutch. It's just unbelievable. How do you even do this? As you drive more, and probably for most of the people out there, driving is something that you don't even think about anymore. You get into the car and go, and your brain goes somewhere, and your hands do all the things. And it's actually the same with public speaking. As you practice, what you gain is control. And what you gain control of is the things on this slide, your body, your voice. So when you're using your hands on stage or in a Zoom or a virtual event window, what you want to think about in adjusting the size of your gestures is, I like to think of it as like hugging the audience. Like if the audience is right in front of you, you're going to hug them like this because they're right here. If the audience is really big, like the picture on the slide, you're going to hug them like this all around. And so your gestures are the same way. Your gestures are really big if there's a lot of people and you have to hug all of them, and they're really small if you just hug a few people. And if you're in a virtual window, you only have really about this much. So it seems like a lot maybe on the screen, but this is about 12 inches. So I know that in doing a lot of these virtual events that if I want to make a gesture, I have to keep it literally within 12 inches in front of me and about a 12-inch space, like almost right in front of my face, just right above my chest. Otherwise, if I start gesturing like this, nobody will be able to see what I'm doing. Um, one other thing to think about when it comes to gesturing is that it depends on your audience. It depends on whether the presentation is to a more formal audience or a more informal audience. So if you think about it, you know that for an informal audience, you can swing your hands around if you're that kind of person. Like I'm the kind of, I like swing my hands around. Some people don't, and that's fine. But I swing my hands. So for an informal audience, I'm going to make gestures and do little waves and do all kinds of fun stuff like that. For a more formal audience, like at a job interview, probably what I do is I tend to tone down my gestures. So, I'll do kind of the prototypical kind of gestures, like this, and get the little things, but I won't be as out there. Another thing, something people want to avoid, not just with your hands, your legs, your posture, is the nervous stuff. And by that, I mean jitter, going from side to side, um, shaking, stuff like that. The That stuff is hard to control when you're a beginner public speaker. And we all know, I mean, it happens to all of us when we're really nervous and, our legs suddenly starts shaking. What do? Well, it's fine. Your presentation is gonna be great. You don't have to worry about your leg shaking. Your leg is shaking, and the audience knows that people get nervous when they speak on stage because they all do as well. But as you gain more control in your public speaking, all that stuff will be within your control. So you'll be able to realize, oh yeah, look, I think I'm speaking faster, or I'm speaking too slow, or my hands are jittering, or I'm shaking my paper, or I'm doing this I have some kind of vocal tic or crutch. And I can stop doing it right in the moment because control. Same thing with your eyes. You can control with a virtual event. You're essentially I'm looking at the little square where the camera is on my screen, and occasionally I'm looking around at my screen. But with an audience, I like to call it the stop and go approach, where you stop at a person, move a little bit, make eye contact with another person, move a little, make eye contact with another person. So over the course of the presentation, you're focused on, you give every part of the room a little bit of attention. And what is a tip to do that is to choose a few people towards the beginning. It's like what Liz said, if there's somebody there that's really supportive, that's in the audience, look at them because they're going to be smiling and sending their love to you. Um, or if there's just somebody who looks like they're really happy to be there, look at that person when you look at that part of the room and just gain energy from that person.
I think
We
a tip
mentioned
that I
before, yeah,
give,
yeah,
one of
go ahead.
my favorite tips for presentations when I was, pre-COVID doing a lot of live presentations, rather than standing behind the curtain, or rather than sitting at the front of the room, I would begin at the back of the room, and I would actually greet people as they were walking in, and I would say hello, and I would meet them. If it was at a conference or a convention, I would try to get registered for the conference ahead of time, so that I would have some friends, and I would strategically ask the friends to sit, I'm going to be speaking at such and such a time at such and such a breakout, come to my breakout, come to my workshop, and to invite them. Because I think that the hug is a really good analogy. I might steal that one with my clients, because I tell my clients it's about the heart. It's about you acknowledging that you have something to give. You have information, you have knowledge, you have information to share about who you are. And the heart of the issue is they want to get to know you. They want to decide if they like you and see if they can trust you based on your presentation. So you've got to hug them in and give of your heart. And at an interview, there's a term called mirroring, and you guys can Google that or look that up. But it's basically connecting with the audience or connecting with the interviewer in such a way that you connect to show you're a good fit. So a mirroring technique is, if they're talking really quickly and they're very excited about the position, then you can get excited about the position and talk really quickly. Or mirroring their behavior, if they're a little more calm and this is a little more serious, then you can reply by being a little more calm and a little more serious, because you want to be on the same page as they are. You want to connect with them. So the voice tone, the voice pace, the volume can all reflect what the audience needs to hear. And for those of you that are like me that speak really quickly and really loudly, your voice inside your head is saying, slow down, let them understand. And if you're kind of quiet and soft spoken, you may need to step it up. I know a lot of people at work, when they've got something to say, they don't raise their voice, and yet people can't hear you and they want to hear what you have to say. So there is this modulation to help you fit in with your audience.
And thinking about volume, pace, and tone, these are all techniques you can use. These are things in your toolbox. to affect an audience. So if you watch a skilled actor performing a monologue, you'll notice that they adjust their volume, they get a little bit softer when they want the audience to really hear them. And the audience will start leaning in because they really want to hear them. Um, they might go faster if they want to convey that somebody is really, really is it may be like a genius, has so many ideas, and people will slow down if they're sad. But the point is that whenever you consider your volume, pace, and tone, you want to think about the effect that you want to have. So when you're at a job interview and you're telling a story, maybe something that was really that affected you deeply in your work life. Think about how you use your volume, pace, and tone at those times. And in your rehearsal, try different variations to see which work the best. So let's move forward. We
Especially
talk
if
about, oh, go ahead,
I was
Liz.
to say, if English is your second language and
Mhm.
you've got an accent, or you're using words that you want to be clear that your audience is understanding, feel free to sort of practice and talk with other people and make sure they're understanding you and hearing you correctly. And if you get a question from somebody, maybe you're interviewing and they ask you a question and you don't understand it, don't hesitate to say, can you explain that a little more clearly? I'm not sure I understand that question, and make sure you get clear on it. There's a funny story about Anthony Bourdain, who was
I
a
was just going to say that, Liz. I'm glad you're
famous
going to tell me
chef,
this one.
and he was early in his career, and he went to a very famous steakhouse in New York City to go for an interview. And he had done a lot of research and was knew his stuff about working at steakhouses, but he didn't know this was a new steakhouse in town. And so he went to the interview and he was talking about how he was a great chef and he was ready to go. And at the end of the interview, the owner of the restaurant, who was not English wasn't his first language, and he had a thick accent, and he asked some sort of a question about, well, what do you know about meat? And what Anthony Bourdain heard was, what do you know about me, as in the owner of the restaurant? And he didn't know much about the owner of the restaurant. So Anthony Bourdain said, well, I don't know very much. I don't know anything. I don't know much about meat. But what the interviewer was asking was, what do you know about meat? Meat, not me. And it became this funny conversation that Anthony Bourdain shares in one of his interviews, about how you just don't know where you're disconnecting. And sometimes we never know where we're disconnecting with an audience, but we have to be curious and we have to be, trusting ourselves to ask questions, get clarity, and make sure that we're on the same page. Because that's really what communication is all about.
I think I might be skipping ahead here, but one way to avoid a situation like Anthony Bourdain's is if you are answering a question during an interview and you see that the audience is starting to waver, or they're not, it seems like maybe something's not connecting, you can always ask, am I on the right track, or am I answering a question? And they'll give them the opportunity to say, oh, well, actually, we wanted to know XYZ. I know that when I've interviewed people, I've had people do that. And I've always, I want people to answer the question that I'm asking. So I'll always help them, steer them in the right direction when it comes to, what I actually want to know. And I think that, maybe not everybody will do that, but I think that it makes sense for the interviewer to try to get their question answered.
Absolutely. And that is a great lead to the next slide, because
Hmm.
what we're talking about is working with the audience. And when you're thinking about
Oh,
working, where'd it go? There it's
there we
at.
go.
Okay. Yeah. Working with the audience is that you do need to observe them and react, and really kind of allow yourself to play with it. I remember once when I was in my speaking career and doing quite a few presentations, and the audiences were getting larger and larger and larger. And I asked somebody, where can I learn how to be a better presenter? And they recommended an improvisation comedy class. And I was like, well, I don't consider myself a comedian. What could I possibly learn at an improv comedy class? But what it was public speaking at another level. And one of the Lizisms that I teach my clients is, when you're doing a public speaking presentation, don't step on laughter. In other words, if you say something and the audience is laughing, let them laugh. Give them a moment to pause because they were listening and they heard what you said and it resonated with them. So before you go on to your next topic, let them really soak it in. And in an interview, if you say something and they start writing things down, you might want to give them a minute to write that down. So allow, observe. And if they do look at you perplexed, you certainly could react by saying, gosh, it looks like that answer didn't land well. Was there something I said? But the second dot here says if the audience doesn't react, don't worry. Sometimes you just need to have the confidence that you're doing the best. They're rooting for you. They want you to succeed. And so you're evening the playing field by making it a conversation.
Yeah, working with audiences is, I think, for most people who are experienced with public speaking, is the best thing about doing it, because these are the people that you're reaching. When I think about working with an audience, I think, observe, react, enjoy, and to me, I get the image of surfing, where you have this audience in front of you, and you can feel their energy. You can feel that they're with you. If you have jokes and you're present, they're laughing at all the right moments, and it's like you're surfing on a wave. And it's one of the best feelings that you can get when you have an audience of two people or 1,000 people, and they're hanging on your every word. It's just amazing. But the way that you do that is through having control over your body and your mind, and you do that through practice, which we'll talk about. But you observe, you look what they're doing, you see you if they're not connecting, you change something up a bit. If you need to bring more energy, you bring more energy. If you need to slow down a bit, you slow down a bit. Enjoy the process of that interaction, of that communication. And we talked a little bit about this already. If the audience doesn't react, don't worry. Where I said sometimes you don't always know why they're feeling the way that they are. Maybe the person didn't have a good lunch. Maybe they had a fight with a spouse. Maybe they've been interviewing for 5 hours and they're just exhausted, and it has nothing to do with you. You're there to do your job as an interviewer, as a speaker, and even if you try to react, you try to make you try to bring more energy, and if it doesn't work, you just keep going. And you mentioned this, Liz, and this is something that's so important for people, especially people who are really nervous about public speaking, to remember that in probably 98% of presentations, the audience really, 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 really wants you to do well. Nobody comes to a talk at a conference or an event or anything, or like even a job interview. No interviewer comes into it going, I really hope this person is bad. You know, I don't want to be entertained, informed, persuaded. No, I want to be disgusted.
Yeah.
I don't I don't think anybody says that. They all really want you to do well.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they'll help you do well.
Absolutely. I think that's probably one of my favorite key takeaways from a presentation like this is that you shift your mindset of this is going to be difficult, I'm going to fail, this is going to be hard, to, you know what? They want me to succeed. They want me to do well. They're on my side. So I need to show up and do the best I can for them.
Mhm. Exactly. And if you feel a little bit nervous, that's okay. Nervousness is normal. Everybody feels nervous. What that is really is your body is excited so you reframe that nervousness. You think, oh, I'm nervous, this is terrible. And you could say, well, this is not great, but my body knows, my brain is excited to present here. It really wants to do well, and its body is, by putting all this adrenaline, it's helping me to meet the needs of the audience, to be able to see everybody, to have quick reactions. Uh, it's just something to remember. But now is maybe what people have been waiting for, Liz. That let's talk about interviews.
Okay. Job interviews, how are they different? Well, we have covered a little bit of this, so it's kind of a recap. So we're telling you what we told you at the beginning. It's about you. And usually the audiences are smaller. You're interviewing with one person or a group. It could include some prompts, some improvisation. I tell my clients there's some great books out there, 101 best interview questions, but there's really only 3 questions that you need to be prepared for an interview. And the first one's going to be, tell me about yourself. And they want to know, tell me something I don't know. Tell me who you are. And then the second question is going to be something along the lines of, why should we hire you? And then at the end of the interview, typically you're going to get a question at the end of the interview that says, is there anything else you'd like to say? Or do you have any questions for us? And this is really a nice time to go back to your rehearsal and maybe the notes that you took and recap all of the interview questions you prepared for that they never asked. Because you can prepare all the answers to all the most challenging questions, but they may not ask those questions. They may ask you very random questions, but at the end of the interview, you have an opportunity to highlight and shine with the questions you've prepared. So job interviews are a little different than public speaking because you're sort of in control, but remember, it's a two-way street. So they're asking questions, but you should also be ready to answer improvisation style, but also answer the prompts, answer the questions you've already got. I'm glancing over at the Q&A box.
There's a couple of questions here.
Yeah,
Let's go through the rest of the presentation, and we'll cover those and whatever
that's a
else
good idea.
folks
Yeah,
have.
let's do that. Couple, we have 2
Because
minutes
we're
left.
almost there.
Yeah.
So this is a really pertinent question that a lot of people ask. What can go wrong during a job interview? And maybe it's the wrong question. Because, I mean, the answer is, yeah, I mean, almost anything can go wrong, really. I mean, most of the things that can go wrong are pretty small. Some things that can go wrong are huge, and it'll put an end to the interview. But really, more things can go right than can go wrong. So let's cover, Liz, some of these things that are, that frequently go wrong for people in job interviews.
I
So what
think
do you do if an interviewer is mean?
yeah. So the biggest problem is that I think sometimes clients will go to an interview based on just the job description. And then they'll get there and they'll realize that the job is not what's on the job description. And all of a sudden they're interviewing for something and the rules of the game have changed. And all of a sudden they're in an interview situation that's not going where they want it to go. And so a lot of times I tell my clients, let's shift the way we think about interviewing, that it's not a one-way street. They're not just there to get to know you, you're there to get to know them. So doing as much research in advance about the company, about the people you're interviewing with, the coworkers you'd be working with, be as prepared as possible so that when you show up, they don't have to spend a lot of time telling you about the company, telling you about the job, all of those things. It's really about turning it around and evening the playing field to make sure you're interviewing them to see if this is the right fit for you. And by doing it that way, you shift the power of they have the job and you want it to they have a need that maybe you can help. And that's where the mindset flips it around, is that I'd say to people, don't be nervous, don't feel rushed, don't feel like you have to be 100%. They are hiring you because they want to know who you are. So your role is to be true to who you are. And the heart of the matter is, this is who I am, and they're either going to like it or not. And that's what Fit's all about.
Right. Well, we had this question that came up earlier. What if you're too nervous during the interview? You get there and you just, they ask you a question or two and you can't string 2 sentences together and you're getting super flustered and you're not sure how you're going to continue the rest of the interview. What do you recommend to people at that moment where they realize that I'm bombing?
I always like to make sure that my clients understand, is this an initial interview, like a screening interview? Because usually the goal of the first interview is actually to get the second interview. It's not to close the job. So if you're too nervous and you're blanking out, I always go with the honesty is the best policy. So if they're throwing really challenging, difficult questions at you and you're blanking out and you're nervous, you might just tell them, gosh, that's a really tough question, or that's a really good question. Can I get back to you on that? Because right now I'm blanking out, and try to go back to what I call your success stories. Try to have a bit of a script that you've rehearsed with your success stories, and then you can lead the conversation. You can go ahead and give them some facts or relate them back to an experience you used to have. I'm looking in the chat because somebody privately messaged me and said, how do we shift it to what we've found and how we've prepared. And I think you lead with those examples. You know, you're asking, if the interviewer is asking you a tough question, you can say, gosh, you know, when I was on your website, or when I was researching this position, or when I was talking to people, I heard you need help with A, B, and C. You're asking me about X, Y, Z, but I'm prepared to help you with A, B, and C. And you can lead them to a powerful place where you're at the heart of solving their problems. Because really, they're interviewing you because they've got a problem. They have a need. They're hiring. They're desperate. And you're showing up as a solution to help them and solve their problem. So shifting it a little bit and evening the playing field is really an important way to look at it.
The success stories bit that you just mentioned is really important. And we people talk about being nervous and forgetting everything and completely going blank. The key with your preparation is to get those success stories so ingrained in your head, and not just what the story is, but how you're going to tell the story. So ingrained in your head that even if you go blank, you sort of have a bootstrap for yourself to say, okay, I know these stories, and you have your resume in front of you, and you look down at your resume and you look at the job that you have,
Yeah.
and you look at the jobs that you've done and go, ah, I remember, you just take a second. They ask you, you say, great question, and you pause and you breathe, and they're not going to go anywhere. They're there for you.
Yeah.
You look down and you look at your resume and think, do I have a story for this one? Do I have a story for this one? Do I have a story for this one? And you do, because you've created those stories and you've told yourself those stories and told the people around you those stories 40 times before the interview.
Yeah.
So you may be going blank in that one moment, but you don't have to be blank in the next moment. You
Yeah.
can take a second, regroup, and tell the story. But how
Yeah.
about if you forget the question? Sorry, Liz, I may have skipped ahead.
Yeah,
Um,
because it's on the next slide. So go ahead and go to
yeah, yeah.
that last slide.
So let's do that.
Because it really
Also,
is, you know, when you're really in the moment, it can be challenging. But the last
mm,
slide is a little bit about how to improve your skills. And so we've talked
mm,
about practicing, 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 being
mhm.
deliberate. And then some of the other things that we talk about are like a mock interview, finding somebody
Yes.
to do a
Hang on,
mock.
before we go there, because I'm about to move to the next slide, and we're
Oh,
gonna jump right into that. Um, I just want to let people know that you can ask people the question. You can ask for the question again. That's the
yeah,
main thing. Like, Peggy mentioned it also in the chat, but you can ask for the question again. It's not a big deal. If you're somewhere in the middle of a question and you're just going on, and then in your mind going, wait a second, am I even answering the question? You
yeah,
can say, can you repeat the question?
right.
It's okay because they have the question in front of them. They want you to answer the question. They're going to try to bring you back on track. Uh, so ask, can you please repeat the question? And they will. And then then that also brings you back to the beginning. Okay, I've answered this part of the question. Now I need to answer this part of the question.
Yeah,
And now let's go to the last slide, which is the best one because it's say the best for last. Okay, so how can you improve your skills? And this is what this whole presentation is about, isn't it? I mean, this is really what we're talking about here. We've
yeah,
given specific techniques. We've given, talked about how to prepare, things specific to job interviews, things to think about when you're on stage. And we keep repeating that the way that you move from being a beginner, the way that you gain control and expertise in public speaking is, well, here it is. You practice deliberately. I think you had gotten started, Liz, so I want to
I did.
shoot it back to you.
Well, I jumped the gun on that, and it was funny because the last slide said feeling rushed, and I was looking at the clock. It's about 12:15, and I was feeling
Yeah.
rushed. But it really is about acknowledging that there's no such thing as perfection. And I love this little box in the middle. Genius demands effort. So we can strive for genius and yet acknowledge that there's no such thing as perfection, but there is practice and we can always get better. Even myself, after doing this for 30 years, I'm still Googling presentation tips before a big presentation just to remind myself and think about things I hadn't thought about. And then, of course, reflecting afterwards. When you get out of an interview, take some notes. I always coach my clients, journal. What were the tough questions? How did you answer them? Reflect on it. What could you do better another time? Or are there some juicy nuggets that you might put in a follow-up email or a follow-up phone call to say, gosh, I was asked this really tough question, and now that I'm back and I'm relaxed in my home, I came up with all these better ideas. So just the practice deliberately and reflect afterwards, I think are key ones. And then you ought to strike up the join a group like Toastmasters. Tell us a little bit
Yes,
more
yes,
about, I mean,
I want to talk about that.
yeah,
But I just want to also throw in when it comes to reflect afterwards, you mentioned, write down the hard questions. Do that in the parking lot. Do that. You get back to your car, you take a piece of paper and you write down all the questions that you remember because you by the time you get home, everything might be going haywire in your head. You might forget them, but when you're right after the interview, just write them down,
yeah.
because you can use those questions to prepare for future interviews. You can help your colleagues to prepare if they need questions for certain interviews. It's good to know those questions and use them for practicing. But let's get back to Toastmasters. It doesn't have to be Toastmasters. It can be a group like Toastmasters. So what is Toastmasters? Toastmasters International, and Anna Sylvia just posted the link in the chat. Thank you, Anna Sylvia. Is an international organization that whose goal is devoted to improving people's communication and leadership skills. And the way that that happens is there are clubs all over, the greater LA area and all over the world. You join a club, and at that club, you get a book, and you focus on each speech in that first book focuses on a different thing within public speaking. So one focuses on vocal variety, one focuses on structure, and during every meeting, you also get evaluated. So you do a speech, and then somebody says you did this well, this well, this well, based on the criteria in that book. There's also a part which you talked about improvisation earlier, Liz. There's also a part during Toastmasters meetings called table topics, where people are called up to speak about a subject for, I don't remember what is it, something like 45 seconds or a minute. You have to speak for a certain amount of time on a topic that you may not be that familiar with. And as you progress in Toastmasters, you really develop the skills of thinking on your feet, of becoming more comfortable in front of people, of structuring your speeches, of preparation. Now, Benson mentioned in the chat, and I wanted to also highlight this, that Toastmasters isn't free. It does cost money to be a member of a club, but, and Liz, we talked about this before when we were planning this presentation, it doesn't cost any money to visit a club. And most clubs are very welcoming to visitors. So if you want to just see what Toastmasters is about, you can go and visit a club. And just, some clubs, they'll even let you participate as a guest.
Yeah.
And not every club may be right for you.
Absolutely. And I recommend that you do visit a handful of clubs. And somebody just put in the post that some of them are virtual now. In Los Angeles, there's a big difference between going to a club that's in Century City at lunchtime, surrounded by a bunch of lawyers and executives, and going to an evening club that's in Studio City with a bunch of directors and producers and film actors and TV people. So the personality of the audience, you've got to ask yourself, what is it I need? Am I pitching a company or an industry and I want to go into a club that has people with that sort of a background? Or do I want a club that's in my community or in my neighborhood? And maybe it's going to be more stay-at-home moms or homemakers. It just sort of depends. So I have a rule of three. I always tell my clients, check out 3 different clubs before you join. Because the first club you might say, ooh, that's a little bit too sophisticated, I'm not ready. The second club might be too casual, and the third one might be just right. And I always say check in with people that are in a Toastmasters because they can sometimes bring you as a guest, and then you've got somebody who's brought you in. And there's other groups. If people want to get in touch with me, I can put my LinkedIn on the message board. I joined an organization called the National Speakers Association because my executive speaking engagements were becoming higher and higher profile. And I found that I needed to kind of up my game. And that's when I joined the improvisation courses, and the National Speakers Association really taught me the business of speaking. And that gave me a lot of confidence skills in my presentation as well. So lots of resources out there to support you.
And one other thing to consider when visiting as a guest and considering which club to join in Toastmasters is think and really ask, are there speaking slots are there speaking slots available during this club meeting? If the meeting is only 45 minutes long and there's like 50 people in the club, those people are signing up for a slot, 2 months out. And if the meeting is twice a month, Now, you just do the math. You're not going to be able to have an opportunity to speak at every meeting. So if you really want to get that speaking experience, and that, I mean, that's what I recommend when it comes to practice. I mean, you really have to do the speaking, is you might think about joining a smaller club where there will be, or a club that meets more frequently, where you'll have more of an opportunity to speak once or twice a month, or at least at somehow at every meeting, because that's really what's going to help you improve your skills.
Yeah.
So that is, I think, what we wanted to cover today, Liz. Do we have anything else to add, or are we ready for questions?
I think we can open it up to some questions.
Yeah. Yeah,
Let's see.
this was really, I think we covered a lot of things. I feel a little bit overwhelmed myself that we covered a lot of stuff here.
We did. And as I said at the beginning, it's no one size fits all, and no two speaking engagements are alike, and no two interviews are alike. And so hopefully, people have taken notes on what resonates with them, and that they've got a perspective and some tools and resources to carry them forward.
hmm And Sylvia, did we have any questions? I'm kind of monitoring the chat, and I think there was some questions somewhere throughout there, but I don't have them on my screen right now. Did you happen to note them down?
Yes, I did, and my internet cut off briefly as well, so I apologize if you maybe you answered some of these that I'll read out to you in just a moment. But just wanted to say good job, both of you. I saw this before, when you were putting it together, and it helped me out when I presented last week. And just taking that with me as someone who's always been fearful of public presentation, your tips are really great, and I think our audience, from the engagement I see in the chat, I think that they took a lot from it. So good job, both of you. Um, which leads me to my first question. This is, what's more important, kind of the content or the delivery, right? For someone who's maybe a little bit fearful of public speaking, and so they don't really have that kind of commanding presence, but they know what they want to say, but maybe they're a little bit afraid that they'll maybe come across as boring or something like that. And you did cover that throughout the presentation, but anything like, power pose, anything else that can kind of help someone to get out of their head and just focus on the content?
Yeah. Liz, do you want to start?
I have a Lizism that I
Sure.
share because I have my little one-liners that hopefully people kind of resonates with. And when you're thinking about a presentation, you're thinking about an interview, you're thinking about the content and the minutia, all the details. What I like to say is take a deep breath and remember, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. So be giving, be caring, be passionate about it, and let all the details sort of fit in where they can.
I would say yes. I would say your Lizism is on target, showing enthusiasm for a topic, and showing that you care for your audience through your preparation, and through your presentation is really important, and it shows through. But in terms of just the pure question, is the content or the delivery more important? I would say that neither of them are more important, because if you have really great things that you have to say, but the audience can't hear you, or you say the stuff in monotone and the audience falls asleep, 15 minutes into the presentation because they can't follow, what you're saying, or the structure of your presentation doesn't match the content, they're not going to get the content. Likewise, if you're a great speaker and you do power poses, and you have a commanding presence and you have a booming voice and you make a lot of jokes, but your content is really thin, they're gonna hear what you say, but no matter how good of a speaker you are technically, they're gonna zone out because you're not telling them anything interesting. So yet, when it comes to preparation, I mean, that's why the preparation piece is so important. That's why we spend so much time on the preparation piece, because when you prepare, you're doing both content and delivery.
Yeah.
Good. Next question. Amanda asks, with online interviews more common, when one has to present a topic to a panel of interviewers, is it best to have a layout like yours today or a full view of the slides only?
That's a really tricky question, because I know that I'm looking at the screen and what I see is a big purple box and then these three little faces, because all I can see are the three of us that are on the panel. So if somebody were interviewing me there, that's what I would want to see more of, is a big, center point person, because the slides are to support you. And I think that sometimes when I really dig into this, and we don't have a lot of time today, but knowing your audience has people that are visual learners, auditory learners, and tactile learners. So having a combination is always good. There's no right or wrong answer. So a nice, smooth combination is what I would recommend.
Right. And it depends on how expressive your voice is. I mean, if the only thing they see is your slides and the only thing they hear is your voice, and you don't have a strong, I mean, if you're just naturally kind of low key, you don't have a strong command of tone, volume, variations in your vocal production, it may be beneficial to have your face in the slide also, because they'll just give people more information to show what Liz was talking about, that you care.
And how about when you're speaking about an emotional topic, when you're addressing a panel that could make a key decision, that would be a key decision maker on the topic? Basically, how do you talk about an emotional topic or issue with a panel?
Yeah, that could, I mean, there could definitely be emotional things that come up during interviews. Work can be hard. Sometimes people ask about failures. What is your greatest failure at work? And just saying greatest failure, it already puts one in a state like, really? You want me to tell you about my lowest moment at work? Um, that's tough. I would say, and Liz probably has other things to add here, that these are some of the things that you want to prepare for. So if you know that something might come up that has emotional content, or that you feel some kind of emotional piece, for example, if you were fired from a job, or if a company you loved had to close, or you had to leave work because somebody died, or you had to because somebody got sick and you had to take care of them. There could be so many possibilities, and it might come up in an interview. Those are just like success stories. These are things that you want to prepare for and drill and rehearse. So, you can get emotional in an interview. It's not something that's going to rule you out. I mean, you're a human being, but you want to be able to convey the story in the way that, in the best possible way for you, in the most clear way for you, and in the way that's best for what they're looking for, what they're looking for in terms of the position, and to help them understand why you're good for that position.
And I appreciate that Oleg went with the career interview emotion side of it, because I looked at that question and I was like, sometimes it's, and this is not not a Lizism, but there is something to be said about the emotional topic being the elephant in the room. And that you might need to say to the audience, this is an emotional topic and we are all on a panel and we all are decision makers on this topic. And yet this is going to be a difficult conversation or a difficult presentation because we all have emotions involved. And I'm going to go back to what Oleg said, which is that we're all people and it's hard to take our emotions out of a conversation. So if you're having to manage a topic that's emotional, and knowing that these decision makers are on the panel to help figure things out, is to address that. There's no easy answer, but let's discuss it. Let's agree to discuss this in polite, maybe set some ground rules for the conversation. That might help.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel very strongly about this, and here's why. And let's talk now.
Absolutely. Open up the lines of communication. And somebody had privately texted a question to me saying, where are the free or volunteer or online public speaking interview coaching things? And I would say that, with the technology today, YouTube, just like this, this is a recording. You can go back, you can play it again, you can listen in. But if your learning style is to learn in an auditory fashion, there's some podcasts on public speaking. There's some great YouTube videos on public speaking. If you're a visual learner, you hit the library and you hit up your local librarian and you say, all right, where are the books on interviewing? Where are the books on public speaking? How do I read how to do mind mapping? How do I learn how to do this? And then, of course, the famous one is to get out there and do it. just do it. Just call up some friends and say, hey, can we talk? Can we communicate? And maybe volunteer.
Hmm.
To do a
Yes.
presentation somewhere, join a chamber of commerce, or volunteer at your church, or put yourself on a committee that you're comfortable with and familiar with, and see if there isn't an opportunity for you to share something that you're passionate about.
The perfect answer. I don't have anything to add to that answer. It's
Okay,
exactly right. But I did want to take the opportunity to say, if you're watching this on YouTube, hello.
great.
I think a question did just come in here. I saw Michelle asks, how does an interviewee build appropriate connection during an interview that endears the interviewer to you? Isn't this the question that everybody wants the answer to? It's like, how do I get the job?
Yeah,
How do I
absolutely.
make this person love me?
Yeah, absolutely. And I talked a little bit about mirroring, because
Mhm.
if you go in there with a mindset of, I want them to know that I'm there to help them, that I'm a good fit for the job, then that just makes you that much more appealing to them, that you're there to help them. You're not there to get anything. It's not a contest. I always tell my clients, don't look at it as I need the job, I get desperate. That's not going to serve you very well. But doing what I call sort of a shoulder to shoulder, and how can we take this company forward, and how can I convey to them that they can trust me? Because
Mhm.
the purpose of the interview is for them to get to know you and like you and trust you. And you can't get hired
Yep.
if you're not putting all those things together.
Honestly, from my perspective, having been an interviewer a good number of times, is I'm predisposed to liking the person who comes into your interview. I really want to. I really want the person to do a great job. I want to be wowed. I want this next person that comes into the room to be the best person I've ever seen and the way that you get the interviewers to like you is you answer the questions in a way that addresses what they need. It's like you said, you're trying to help them. If I ask a question, somebody gives me an answer, even if it wasn't the one I was expecting, that shows me that they're familiar with the job, that they've done certain things before, that they have experiences that have shaped their lives, that they're open to learning. It really depends on the job, but for most companies, they want staff who are have an open mindset, who have done the job before, who have had the experiences before, who are open to doing something new, who want to contribute to the organization. And you have to say words that express that. You know, this is the thing. Nobody knows that you feel that way unless you tell them during the interview.
Right, right. Exactly. Yeah.
All right, Anna Sylvia. Oh, wait a second. There's a question that came in just now. How best to handle controversial topics? Gingerly,
Carefully.
carefully. All right, I think that'll do it. And Sylvia, do you want to take us out?
Yes, thanks Oleg, thanks Liz. Great presentation as always, learned a lot, as did our audience. Thank you so much everyone for joining us, and we will see you next week.
All
Bye.
right. Thanks, guys. Bye.